Alcatraz prison. Imagine being trapped on a rocky island, surrounded by icy waters, where the echoes of the past never die. This notorious federal prison housed America's most dangerous criminals. Today, Alcatraz stands abandoned, but it's far from empty. Ghostly apparitions, chilling whispers, and terrifying encounters haunt its corridors. Welcome to the ghost stories of the Rock. Story 1. Cell 14D. As a tour guide on Alcatraz Island, I've seen and heard many strange things, but nothing compares to the night I decided to stay behind after the last tour. Alone in the dark, exploring the legendary D Block. Known for its solitary confinement cells, has a reputation for being the most haunted area in the prison. Specifically Cell 14D, often called as the Hole, where the worst of the worst were sent for punishment. That night, as the last ferry departed, I found myself alone with just my flashlight and the oppressive silence of the empty prison. I made my way to D Block, my footsteps echoing through the desolate hallways. The air grew colder as I approached Cell 14D, a chill that seeped into my bones. I shone my flashlight into the cell, seeing nothing but darkness in the cold, hard floor. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I decided to step inside, to feel what those condemned men felt. As soon as I crossed the threshold, a sense of dread washed over me. The air felt thicker, almost suffocating. I sat down in the corner, switching off my flashlight, plunging myself into complete darkness. It was then that I heard it. A faint whisper, so close it felt like it was right in my ear. At first I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, but then the whispers grew louder, more insistent. I strained to make out the words, but they were in a language I couldn't understand. Suddenly, a forceful push knocked me off balance, and I scrambled to get up, heart pounding. The cell door slammed shut, and I was trapped. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my flashlight. When I finally turned it on, I was met with the sight of a dark figure standing in the corner of the cell, staring at me with hollow eyes. It was an apparition of a man wearing old prison garb, his face twisted in agony. The whispers grew louder, filling my head with a cacophony of voices. I felt an overwhelming sense of despair, as if all the suffering of the prisoners who had been there before me was crushing down upon me. Desperately, I pushed against the cell door, and to my relief, it swung open. I ran out, not daring to look back. As I reached the main corridor, the whispers faded and the temperature returned to normal. Shaken, I left the prison and vowed never to stay behind alone again. I later learned that many visitors and staff have reported similar experiences in Cell 14D, where the tortured souls of Alcatraz prisoners seem to linger, unable to escape their eternal torment. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and growing paranoia. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home. Lights would flicker in my apartment, and I often woke up in the middle of the night, convinced I heard whispers echoing from the walls. One evening, as I sat in my living room trying to relax, the television turned on by itself, static filling the screen. Among the hissing, I could hear faint voices calling my name, just like in Cell 14D. Desperate for answers, I reached out to a local historian who had extensively studied Alcatraz's dark past. He confirmed that Cell 14D was notorious, not just for its harsh conditions, but also for the numerous deaths and reports of hauntings. According to him, prisoners who were placed in solitary often went mad, driven to the brink by isolation and darkness. Some even claimed to have seen ghostly figures and heard voices before taking their own lives. One particular story he shared stood out. In the 1940s, a prisoner named Samuel had been placed in Cell 14D after a violent altercation. Guards reported hearing him scream about being attacked by a dark figure. The next morning they found him dead with marks on his neck as if he had been strangled, though no one else could have entered the cell. Samuel's death was officially ruled as a suicide, but rumors of a vengeful spirit in Cell 14D persisted. With this new knowledge, I returned to Alcatraz, this time accompanied by a paranormal investigator named Rachel. She had a reputation for being able to communicate with spirits and had conducted numerous investigations in haunted locations. As we stood outside cell 14D, Rachel took out her equipment: a digital recorder, an EMF meter, and a thermal camera. The air around us felt thick, heavy with anticipation. We entered the cell, and Rachel immediately began to speak softly, addressing the spirit she believed was present. She asked for a sign, any indication that we were not alone. For a while, there was nothing but silence. Then, the EMF meter spiked, and the temperature dropped significantly. Rachel started asking questions, and to our astonishment, the recorder picked up faint, whispered responses. The spirit, it seemed, was indeed Samuel. Through the static and whispers, he conveyed his torment, how he had been haunted by the same dark figure that had pushed him to his death. Rachel assured him we were there to help, to understand his suffering. The EMF meter continued to spike, and the whispers became clearer, almost as if Samuel was standing right next to us, desperate to be heard. As the session ended, Rachel performed a cleansing ritual, hoping to give Samuel some peace. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive feeling began to lift. Although the experience was terrifying, it also felt somewhat cathartic. I left Alcatraz that day with a newfound respect for the unseen and a hope that Samuel had finally found some semblance of peace. When I returned home that night, I noticed that the strange occurrences had stopped, and my apartment felt peaceful once more. It seemed that whatever haunted me from Alcatraz had finally been put to rest. Story 2. The utility corridor. Working as a maintenance technician on Alcatraz Island, I thought I was prepared for anything. The prison was old, and keeping it in shape for tourists required constant attention. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened one stormy night in the utility corridor beneath the prison. It was late, and the island was deserted. I had been called to fix a faulty generator that was causing power fluctuations. As I descended into the bowels of the prison, the air grew damp and heavy. The utility corridor was a labyrinth of pipes and wires, dimly lit by flickering bulbs that cast eerie shadows on the walls. As I worked on the generator, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor, assuming it was one of my colleagues. I called out, but there was no response. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate. Coming closer, I felt a cold draft brush past me, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned to see a shadowy figure at the end of the corridor. It was a man, dressed in an old prison guard uniform, his face obscured by darkness. He stood still for a moment, then slowly began to walk towards me. My heart pounded as I realized that his feet weren't touching the ground. He was gliding silently over the floor. Frozen in place, I watched as he approached, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. When he was just a few feet away, he vanished, leaving behind a cold, empty silence. I quickly finished my work, my hands shaking, and hurried back to the surface. The next day, I mentioned the incident to an older colleague who had worked on the island for years. He listened quietly, then told me about a prison guard named Joseph who had died in the utility corridor in the 1940s. According to legend, his spirit still roams the corridor, watching over the prison he once guarded so diligently. My curiosity piqued, and I decided to do some research on Joseph. I found old newspaper clippings and prison records that detailed his tragic end. Joseph had been a diligent and well-respected guard. But one night, while making his rounds in the utility corridor, he suffered a fatal heart attack. His body was found the next morning, his face twisted in an expression of fear. Some speculated that he had seen something that night, something that scared him to death. After learning this, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. I avoided the utility corridor as much as possible, but one night, another power issue forced me to return. This time the atmosphere was even more oppressive. The air was thick, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. As I worked quickly to fix the problem, the temperature dropped suddenly, and I heard the faint sound of labored breathing. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that made the shadows dance more wildly. I tried to focus on my work, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Just as I finished the repair, I felt a cold hand brush against my back. I spun around, but there was no one there. The breathing grew louder, echoing through the corridor. My flashlight died, completely plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled to find my way out. I managed to navigate back to the surface, my heart pounding the entire way. When I finally emerged into the open air, the oppressive feeling lifted and the sounds of the normal world returned. I vowed never to go back into the utility corridor alone again. Whatever haunted that place was beyond my understanding, and I wasn't eager to confront it again. Since that night, I haven't had any more encounters, but the memory of Joseph's ghostly presence and the eerie experiences in the utility corridor still haunt me. Alcatraz may be just a historic site for many, but for those who have experienced its haunted past firsthand, it's a place where the line between the living and the dead is disturbingly thin. Story 3. The Alcatraz Infirmary. The infirmary on Alcatraz Island exhaled a chill that seeped into my bones, a tangible presence that whispered of unseen horrors lurking within its walls. As I entered, the air thickened with an oppressive weight, suffocating me with the memories of suffering that permeated the space. In the dim light, shadows danced, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to mock the living. But amidst the darkness, I caught a glimpse of movement. A flicker of movement that sent a shiver down my spine. As I strained my eyes, I saw someone standing just beyond the window, his form obscured by the veil of night. At first, he was nothing but a silhouette, a dark outline against the pale moonlight. But as he drew closer, I could make out the details of his twisted visage. His face was a canvas of horrors, twisted and contorted into a grotesque mask of agony. His eyes burned with a feverish intensity, boring into mine with a hunger that sent a chill down my spine. His skin was pallid and mottled, like that of a corpse left to rot in the sun, and his lips curled into a twisted grin that spoke of madness and despair. With each step, he drew closer, his presence filling the room with an oppressive weight that threatened to crush me. I tried to tear my gaze away, escape from the nightmare unfolding before me, but I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips, drowned out by the cacophony of my own terror. In a desperate bid for escape, I stumbled backward, crashing into the walls in my haste to flee. But no matter how fast I ran, he was always there, his twisted form looming just beyond the reach of the flickering lights. As I burst through the doors of the infirmary and raced to the docks of the island, I could feel his gaze burning into my back, his silent laughter echoing in the empty corridors behind me. I stayed there until daylight, trembling with fear as I listened to the faint laughter and the scraping of nails on stone, knowing that the man from the shadows was still out there, waiting for me to return. The next morning, I mentioned the incident to my colleague. His face went pale as he listened, and he asked me to describe the figure I had seen. When I detailed the horrific visage, he seemed both shocked and deeply troubled. He rummaged through a drawer and pulled out an old, yellowed photograph, showing it to me with a trembling hand. "Is this him?" he asked. "That's him," I whispered. My colleague took a deep breath and began to explain. "That's Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz. He was one of the most notorious inmates here, convicted of heinous crimes and known for his disturbing experiments on birds. He spent most of his sentence in the infirmary, right where you were last night. He died there, lost to his own madness and the eerie vibes of Alcatraz. In his final days, he was tormented by creepy visions and whispers in the corridors, driving him crazy. He kept rambling about dark figures coming for him. And it's said that the shadows eventually took him, sealing his fate. After his death, many staff members refused to enter the infirmary at night, claiming they heard whispers and felt an oppressive presence. Some even reported seeing a shadowy figure lurking in the corners. This was why you had been warned to not enter the infirmary after dark. As he spoke, a chill ran down my spine. The realization that I had come face to face with the ghost of Robert Stroud left me with an icy dread that seemed to seep into my very soul. The presence I had encountered, with its twisted visage and burning eyes, haunted my thoughts. I never returned to Alcatraz after that night. The memory of Stroud's grotesque face and the oppressive weight of his presence was enough to keep me away. Even now, in the stillness of my own home, there are moments when I can still hear his chilling laughter echoing in the dark. It's a grim reminder that some spirits are never at rest, and the walls of Alcatraz hold more than just history. They harbor the anguished souls of those who can never escape their eternal torment. As we wrap up the chilling secrets of Alcatraz, remember, the dark holds countless more mysteries waiting to be uncovered. If you love diving into the eerie and unexplained, hit that subscribe button and, don't worry, it's not haunted. Or is it? Be sure to like and share this video with fellow thrill seekers. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and may the mysteries of the supernatural continue to captivate your imagination. This is Supernatural Secrets signing off.